The prairie night was hushed, save for the creak of saddle leather and the weary sigh of a horse whose ribs showed through its hide. Eli Turner rode bent in the saddle, lantern swinging at the horn, throwing a thin ring of light ahead of him. The sky was so clear he felt the stars press close, 1,000 cold eyes above. He had lived beneath them all his life, yet never once felt they belonged to him. Loneliness had a way of making a man feel like a ghost among the living, drifting from day to day, without anyone knowing his name. Eli was 35 and already carried the stoop of a man twice that age. His ranch was a patch of dust and broken fences, more debt than cattle, more silence than laughter. Once he had thought himself destined for more, dreamed of filling the house with a family, of being known as a man of means. But the years had stripped him down to bone and callous. In town he walked with his head low, hearing whispers, that Turner boy, poor as a church mouse. No woman in her right mind would hitch herself to that. Clara Dawson said it loud enough for him to hear once, and the sting never left. Shame was his truest companion. That night, with nothing but weariness in his mind, he heard something that stopped him. A sharp cry carried on the wind, ragged and desperate. He pulled the reins and listened. Again it came, from the ravine that cut like a scar across the land. Lantern swinging, he urged his horse toward the sound, each hoofbeat echoing in the hollow earth. At the bottom, the light revealed 2 figures bound to a fallen tree, their arms lashed cruelly, bodies bruised. They were women, taller than any he had seen, shoulders broad, faces striking even in misery. Apache, the older one, Naima, though he would not know her name yet, glared at him with a fire that dared him to move closer. The younger, Ayoka, trembled but held her chin high, her gaze steady despite blood at the corner of her mouth. They had been left to die, perhaps sport for cowhands who had no business tangling with human souls. Eli's chest tightened. He knew the risk. To help them was to invite scorn, maybe worse. But to leave them, he could not. He swung down, knife flashing in the lantern light, and cut the ropes. The older sister staggered but did not fall. She stood tall, towering over him, eyes unreadable. The younger rubbed her wrists, whispered something in her tongue, soft as wind in pine. Eli felt their dignity press against him like a weight. He had thought himself invisible to the world, yet under their gaze, he felt seen. They followed him without words. 3 shadows stretched long across the moonlit prairie, a poor rancher flanked by 2 giant sisters, silent as stone. The horse plodded slow, burdened with their presence, and Eli's heart beat strange in his chest. By dawn, hunger forced him into town. He hitched the horse outside Dawson's store, shoulders tight, already hearing whispers before he opened the door. Folks turned their heads. Men stepped back. Clara Dawson herself let out a sharp breath, lips pinched tight. Marshal Boone's boots clicked across the boardwalk, his hand brushing his rifle. "Turner," Boone said, eyes hard. "You're stirring trouble bringing them here." Eli wanted to sink through the floor. The shame of every failure rose again, but behind him the sisters stood unbending, like mountain cliffs against the storm of judgment. Their stillness unsettled everyone, the kind of stillness that said they had seen worse and would not bow now. Eli forced his steps forward, bought what food he could, and left under a rain of whispers. That night, silence filled the ranch house until Naima moved. She did not speak, did not thank him. She simply lifted a broken rail from the corral fence and set it right, her hands sure, her shoulders broad beneath the starlight. Ayoka fetched water, her voice low as she hummed a tune that carried across the yard. Eli watched from the porch, lantern on his knee, and felt something stir he had not known in years. The house was no longer hollow. Their presence breathed life into the dead corners. But whispers travel faster than horses. By the next morning, word spread that Chief Taza himself had been seen riding with his men, heading toward Eli's land. Folks gathered in knots, muttering that Turner had dug his own grave. Boone said he'd keep his rifle close. Clara Dawson crossed herself in the street. At the ranch, Eli stood with his heart pounding, watching the horizon. Dust rose like a storm far off, and with it the fear that it had saved the sisters only to lose everything, his land, his life, when their people came to claim them. The lantern burned low, and he could feel the ground tremble with the coming of horses. The morning broke pale and silver, the kind of dawn that stretched thin across the plains and set every blade of grass trembling with dew. Eli Turner fed his horses with hands that shook, the kernels falling from his grip, the sound of them hitting the trough too loud in the silence. Behind him, Naima and Ayoka stood like carved figures, their shadows tall against the barn wall. Neither spoke, but their eyes were turned to the horizon where dust had begun to stir. The sound came next, faint at first, then swelling like a drumbeat, the pounding hooves of riders. Eli's mouth went dry. He wiped his palms on his worn trousers, though the sweat clung stubborn. He thought of his small, battered ranch, of the loneliness he had carried for so long, and wondered if this was how it ended. Not with dignity, not with peace, but in the shadow of men riding to claim vengeance. The Apache came into view, a dozen strong, their ponies moving as one body. At their head rode a man taller than the rest, shoulders wrapped in eagle feather mantle, his face carved in solemn lines that looked as old as the land itself. Chief Taza. His eyes swept the ranch, cold fire behind them, before fixing on Eli. The riders fanned out, silent, surrounding house and corral, until Eli felt as small as a rabbit caught in a circle of wolves. From the edge of a road, townsfolk had gathered, keeping distance but not far enough for whispers not to carry. Clara Dawson clutched her shawl, lips white. Marshal Boone stood stiff, rifle resting against his shoulder, though he dared not lift it fully. The whole valley seemed to hold its breath. Taza dismounted slowly, every movement deliberate. The ground seemed to bend beneath his weight as he stepped forward, his gaze never leaving Eli. When he spoke, his voice was low but carried like thunder. "Why," he said, each word measured, "does a poor white rancher keep 2 of my daughters beneath his roof?" The word struck Eli like a blow. Daughters. His heart faltered. He had thought them captives, strays. Instead, he had harbored the blood of a chief. His knees threatened to give, but he stood, lantern of courage flickering somewhere deep inside. "I found them bound," Eli said, his voice rough. "Left for dead in the ravine. I couldn't leave them." The silence stretched so long he thought he might collapse beneath it. Taza's eyes searched him, unblinking, as though peeling back every layer of his soul. Around them, the horses snorted, the wind stirred dust, and the townsfolk leaned in, hungry for blood. Boone muttered, "Fool sealed his fate." Then Taza stepped closer until Eli could see the fine cracks in the chief's weathered skin. For a heartbeat longer he thought the blade would fall. Then Taza's expression shifted, grave but softened. "You did not see enemies," he said slowly. "You saw daughters, and you gave them back their dignity." He raised his voice, turning so all could hear. "Such a man is not my foe. He is kin." The words rippled through the onlookers like fire in dry grass. Clara gasped, clutching her throat. Boone swore under his breath. Eli himself could not breathe. Kin. The word hung in the air like a miracle. Chief Taza lifted his hand, and one of his men rode forward carrying a bundle wrapped in deerskin. He laid it at Eli's feet. Inside was a finely woven blanket, colored in earth and sky, and a carved staff tipped with obsidian. Taza spoke again. "You are under our shield now. Your land will not be touched. Whoever raises a hand against you raises it against me." The townsfolk shifted uneasily, the judgment in their eyes replaced with something else, wariness, perhaps even respect. Eli bent to lift the blanket, his fingers trembling, the weight of it more than fabric. It was belonging, unexpected and heavy, after a lifetime of scorn. That night, the ranch glowed faintly in the hush of stars. Eli sat by the fire, worn from a storm of the day. His head drooped, and he drifted half to sleep in the chair. A soft rustle stirred him. Naima was there, silent as ever, a shadow moving with sure grace. She laid the woven blanket across his shoulders, tucking it so it would not fall, then stood back. Her face was unreadable, but her eyes lingered just a moment before turning away. She did not speak, and neither did he. But in the quiet gesture, in the warmth pressing close to his chest, something wordless passed between them. Ayoka hummed again from the hearth, a low tune that twined with the crackle of firewood. Eli closed his eyes, and for the first time in years, the house did not feel like a hollow shell. It felt lived in, held, as though something had been set alight in its bones. In the days that followed, gossip still flickered through town, but it carried less bite. Some still sneered, whispering behind their palms. But others, men who had once laughed at him, looked away when he passed. A few even tipped their hats. And when Apache riders were seen nodding to Eli Turner as they crossed his land, Clara Dawson's tongue stilled. The poor rancher who had once been pitted now walked with quiet dignity, shielded by the respect of a chief and the silent loyalty of two sisters he had once found bound to death. One evening, Eli stood at the corral fence, watching Noema guide a stray colt with patience and strength. The colt balked, but she neither struck nor shouted. She waited, let it circle, then eased it forward with steady hands. Eli found his throat tight. In her strength, there was no cruelty. In her silence, no scorn. He thought of how folks had always seen him, weak, poor, not enough. But here was a woman who measured worth not in gold, nor land, nor gossip, only in action. The wind lifted, carrying the scent of sage, the sound of Ayoka's song drifting from a porch. Eli rested his hand on the blanket across his shoulders, its weave rough but steady, and he felt rooted for the first time in his life. And if you had been there, you would have seen a man once broken by shame standing taller than he knew he could, flanked by two sisters whose presence gave him back his own reflection. Perhaps that is what life does when we least expect it. It takes the poor, the lonely, the forgotten, and offers them moments to act in quiet grace. Moments that change everything. So remember this, friend. Dignity is not bought with gold or won through applause. It is born in silence, in small mercies no one else sees. It grows when you lift another from the dust, even when the world tells you not to. And when the years roll on, it is those mercies, those simple, stubborn choices, that make a man's life worth the telling.